Welcome to the Spare Parts Podcast with FTC Team 535 Tobor. This is Episode 5, Complication Vortex.
Hello and welcome to the Spare Parts Podcast with FTC Team 535 Tobor. This is our 10th year as an FTC team, and today we've got four fairly experienced members here, veteran members, to talk about this year's game, Velocity Vortex. But we're going to start with kind of a little bit of team history. We started this podcast in fall of 2015, so about a year ago. And then as the season progressed, we kind of lost track of the podcast. We had so much actual robot work to do that we ran out of time to do some podcasting. And so we ended up coming back from the World Championships last year and discovering, oh, we only made a couple of episodes. So now we're back and we're going to do our best to do maybe 2 episodes a month of the podcast, at least, hopefully more sometimes. Just to give you an idea of how we did last year, at the North Super Regional, we were the captain of the quarterfinal. Well, we were a captain of a quarterfinalist alliance, and then at Worlds, we were on one of the quarterfinalist alliances in the Franklin division.
So you can trust us, really?
Hopefully, yeah.
Or hopefully a reliable source.
So we've got, as I said, we've got 10 people on the team this year. 4 of us are here now. So I'm Ben Mikek. I'm mostly a programmer, but I do a little bit of everything.
I'm Dave Link, and I'm ME in wiring.
I'm Connor Davis. I help with the engineering notebook as well as build the robot.
And I'm Van Bennett. I spent a lot of my time on the 3D model, just making sure that our ideas will work out.
And David Link there said ME, mechanical engineering, so building, for people who don't know that.
It's the lingo.
Yeah,
Lingo.
So we'll kind of go around and everybody, let's say, a few things that we think are important about this year's game. So we can start with Link.
Oh, well, obviously the most important thing is the center structure this year, which is the rotating goal itself. And to get the actual trajectory right when shooting for that center goal is going to be insanely difficult.
Okay. Connor.
Well, this year is certainly an interesting game. Whereas in years before you've had many tasks to accomplish all at once, this year there are very few, and they're not very high ranking in points. So it's going to be very important to hone your skill on specifically these few items. Particularly, what we noticed was the autonomous period, which has a much greater influence than it has in later years.
Yeah, so what I've noticed is basically what Connor was saying, is that they've put a much bigger emphasis on autonomous. If you get both beacons in autonomous, that's 60 points. Getting the cap ball up onto the center structure that Link was mentioning earlier, which is no easy task. It's way up there, you can only do it during endgame, and the cap ball is unusually heavy. That's only worth 40 points. Hitting both of the beacons, which is something teams have had a chance to try last year during First Rescue, and if you're a rookie team, I'd suggest looking up some videos of First Rescue and how people hit those buttons. It's going to be absolutely crucial. Everyone should be going for those.
Yeah, the beacon buttons are definitely going to be really important. And autonomous in general has been elevated, and I think that's been happening kind of progressively every year that we've been in this. Autonomous has become a larger and larger part of the game. So autonomous is going to be critical this year, and pushing the beacons, even during teleop, is also going to be important because it's also going to create kind of a race and a back and forth type interaction between the two alliances. One alliance pushes the beacon, then the other does, and over again. That'll create some interesting interactions between robots.
Alright, so pros and cons. Throw any of them out there that you got.
Yeah, and I guess, so what do we like about the way the game is designed this year, not necessarily about how we're going to play it?
Some things I like about, again, like I said, was there's not as much chaos as there was before. There's a few things you want to go for, and you can continuously, throughout the season, practice those, hone those, get them down to perfection. That's something I like. It's something that you're able to just, there's only a few things in your, what you want to accomplish, and you can accomplish those things well. something I don't like was, because of how few things there are, there's going to be maybe a bit of disorder among fellow teammates as you each agree who goes for what, since there's so few things to do, such as the particles on the ground. Who gets what particles? How many are you allowed to have at one time? Stuff like that. Might be a little bit difficult, but I still think overall it's a good thing.
Yeah, so I wonder if the game design committee was kind of trying to push teamwork more this year, because last year and in years before that, I mean, there were a whole bunch of blocks or balls, or in last year's case, both covering the floor. So you have your stuff and your alliance partner has stuff. There's a pseudo-infinite supply of blocks or balls, and you just go down, collect them, and score them. Last year there was a little bit of strategizing with who goes up which side of the mountain, but in general the two alliance partners were independent of each other. This year that's definitely not going to be the case. You have to figure out how to split up that limited number of particles and who's going to do what.
Yeah. That's one thing. I kind of think that there's pros and cons to the simplifying, and not just like on the interactions with other teams, but just on like a team, like a solo team, look at it not worrying about alliances, because although it gives you more time to focus in on one task or two tasks and do them really well, it means that there are fewer swing points. So in past games, there would be major things that you would do, like hanging or scoring debris, and like any of the major point scores, and then there'd be little things like maybe hitting the beacons was a little thing last year, or hitting the all clear signal, little things that are like 10, 20 points here and there. And what that meant is that as it got into higher ranks of competition, it'd be easier. It'd be whoever can get those swing points, because everyone was doing the major things, and then there'd be the little swing things you'd have to do. This year, there's just really the major point scores. So I think it might be more likely this year for us to see ties, because it's however many points that people get in those major ones, and if each team is doing the major tasks similarly, there aren't really that many swing points to get.
I get what you're saying there, because you're right. If you get multiple little tiny things, those things add up, and they could decide between a win and a loss. What I think takes the place of it this year is there's a little bit more interaction between the two teams, such as grabbing the beacons before in-game, the 40 points in the end, and possibly interfering with the rotating center goal as the other team tries to lift up their giant ball. There's just a little, you're right, there's definitely a greater chance for more ties this year. I think they tried to solve it with that a little bit, but there could be more.
What do you think, Link?
Overall, there's a general deflation of points compared to last year.
Yeah.
No, definitely.
Because just in main teleop phase itself, shooting a ball up into the center goal is only worth 5 points. Which, back in last year, if we got one ball in the high goal, that was worth 15. The only way we can get one of those balls to be worth 15 is if we get it in autonomous phase.
And
Yeah.
also, there are just fewer balls, so you can't score like it'd be typical in the higher ranks last year to go up and score 5 pieces in the upper goal, and that's 5 times 15. That's 75 points right there. But you can only have a maximum of 5 particles this year.
Yeah.
So even if you got all 5 particles, even if your teammate gave you all 5 particles and you scored all of them, you would only get 25 points. Mm-hmm. So it is just a much lower scoring game. And that's a good thing to remember, especially like looking back at other years and being like, we're not scoring near this. And it's like, that's fine.
In terms of the game design, I think that a big con is going to be kind of refereeing. That seems like it's going to be much, much harder this year than in past years, because you actually have to be watching live both of those baskets, essentially, and counting how many times balls go through there. You can't just count up at the end. And so you would have to dedicate at least 2 referees, one for each, to watch each one of those, and maybe also referees to watch those the center the ramps on the edges. So and also the extending too high. That's kind of that has to be watched very carefully, and that introduces another layer of ambiguity for referees to deal with.
I'm guessing that in the lower levels, like regionals and state, it's going to be more of, as long as you're not going and touching the spinning. So the height requirement is so that you cannot touch the spinning center goals during teleop phase.
Yeah.
Because the bottom part of those spinning center goals is exactly at the height that you're not allowed to pass. So it's meant to stop you touching those. So I think that referees, as long as you're not trying to touch those, maybe if you're kind of near the edge of the height requirement, they're just not going to worry about it, because the purpose of that rule is to stop you from messing with the center goals. So as long as you're kind of following that, probably going to give you some leniency. But in like super regionals, who knows? They might be using cameras to like get.
Maybe. Well, and FRC uses kind of electronic automatic scoring systems for some of the things. Like last year with the boulders, they had electronic systems to count how many were scored. So that might be kind of a cool innovation. It would seriously increase the cost of hosting competitions and increase how complicated it is to set up fields. But that might be something we see in the future.
Yeah, who knows?
As far as the end game, also, there's this rule in the game manual about not being able to, I think it's grip, grasp, or attach to that center structure. And so the definition of that is going to be something that is in play, I think, this year. We've always talked about how the definition of control of game elements is important in past years, where you're limited to 4 or 5 pieces of debris. But this year, I think the equivalent of that, since there are only 5 pieces of debris on the field, at most that many, the equivalent to that controversy is going to be, what does grab, grasp, or attach mean, right? And so if I just push it over, that seems like that's probably not a violation. But what if I stick something in between some of those, like the poles on the basket? Does that count? What about like grabbing the pole and spinning it on the base?
No doubt these will be questions asked during the drivers' meeting upon you guys.
Well, and hopefully, I would hope that we get clarification of that before we get to a drivers' meeting, because once you're at the drivers' meeting, you can't really change your robot design.
And a good place to do that is the first forums.
Yeah, the forums.
Each team gets an account for the first forums, and we'd suggest very highly going on to those. I'm sure that there will be plenty of people asking questions already about rules, so it's a good place to just go and get more clarifications. Like, for one thing, the debris, the particles, if you're scoring them in the baskets, they have to touch the ground before they can be rescored.
Yeah.
And we're thinking of a strategy, which we'll get to in a minute, that might have us touching the particles before they hit the ground. And the question is that allowed? And as long as the particles hit the ground before we rescore them, is that fine? Or do they have to just be free falling from the goal to the ground, no one interfering with them at all, before they're viable to be scored again?
Not only that, but the end game itself is mostly underwhelming compared to last year's.
Yeah, there's just really one thing.
There's only the cat ball.
I mean, there is only one thing, but I mean, I think it's just as an amazing feat as hanging was last year. Or maybe,
it's definitely
maybe
an
more.
amazing feat. It's definitely an amazing feat, but whereas last year you had teams who were getting, scored 300 points that round, 500 points that round. Now it's going to be, see you can score, 200 points.
Yeah.
If that.
And one thing also to consider, we were talking about alliance, how alliances are going to be more complicated. There's only one cat ball per team.
Yeah.
So you're going to have to decide only one of your team members can mess with that cat ball during endgame. So every endgame, there's going to be a robot that's just doing basically what it was doing during teleop to try and get points, and doesn't get to do any of the endgame stuff at all.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing during endgame, you aren't allowed to de-score the other team's cat ball. So I wonder, that introduces kind of more referee ambiguity, because, like, what if we're spinning around the structure and they try to put it on and the cat ball falls off? Is that de-scoring, or how do we define what is just moving it around enough to prevent them from scoring but not de-scoring it? I think that could be a really good defense strategy, just moving around that goal to prevent the other team from
one thing to
scoring.
mention, earlier we said that you couldn't go up to touch the spinning goals. That was only during the normal part of teleop.
Yeah.
During endgame, you are allowed to go higher than that. What was it, 50? No.
Oh, it's like 39 inches or something.
You are allowed to go higher than that 39 inches during end game, because, I mean, otherwise it'd be really hard to score the cat ball. So allowing you to go over 39 inches during endgame means that now you're allowed to try and spin
29
that around.
inches, sorry.
29.
Yeah.
Just to replace everything I said with 29.
Plus, I think that with there's only being one thing for the end game, I think that kind of plays a couple of the teams off from doing the one-trick robot of just waiting till end game, picking up the ball, and just putting the cap on it, because that's not going to work anymore.
The putting the cap ball on is worth a lot less comparatively to previous end game.
If you really think about it,
strategies.
too, they eliminated most of the simple robots. There's no such thing as a push bot really anymore. At least
Well, I think there could be. I mean,
you
you
could,
can push
but
the
it's going to be
particles up the
overwhelming.
ramps.
It's going to be underwhelmed majorly. There's no longer the 30, 20-point things you can
I mean,
grab
I'm
with.
thinking if you can make a decent push bot that can hit the beacons really reliably, you could earn a lot of points just with that.
Yeah, you could, but any other robot could do as well.
I think that's the new push bot is a
Yeah,
beacon bot.
yeah.
So it's like teams that might be having to rush or can't get their ideas working out. If you can hit the beacons, you could do pretty well at just the regional levels.
Yeah.
But there's just not one thing that you can do anymore. Your robot has to be slightly more complex now than just saying, oh, hey, our robot can pick up the ball and put it on the goal. What else can you do?
I'm not sure I really agree with that, because you could just hit the beacons. I mean, right.
But you're going to have nothing to back that up. Whereas in, like, I know in Cascade Effect, you could drag those little pipes everywhere with you. You can 10, 30 points, drag them up other places, park yourself other places. This time, there's just that. There's just you hitting the beacons and then getting 1 point apiece for balls on a ramp, which is it's a good start, but it has no push behind it.
But
Okay.
in any case, so that's kind of our thoughts on the game. Now, for strategies,
Yeah.
what we've been kind of thinking about this year
Is winning.
well, aside from winning, that's a universal goal, is because it's such a low-scoring game, and because the debris is so limited, and this might be kind of weeded out in rule clarifications to come, but getting a loop going is probably going to be teams' best way of really making match-changing points. So let's say that both teams are like doing the cap ball and hitting the beacons. Well, they're pretty even there. The only other way to score points is with the particles, and because there's so few particles, it's kind of hard. You could get it's only 1 point getting them up the ramp, and only 5 points shooting them into the baskets, so that can be kind of hard to make the proper swing. If you're really going to want to make points with the particles, you're going to need a way of keeping it going, of on the floor maybe collecting them back in from the sides as they come in, so you can keep shooting them up and get that loop going. And that's going to be the way to make a ton of points this game.
Oh yeah, because that 1 minute of teleop is going to go by super fast.
Also,
if
you're
you're
a minute and a half of teleop
if
plus
you
the
include
end game.
in-game, yeah, but that's
No,
going to
it's a minute and a half of normal teleop plus the end game.
Which is, it's 2 minutes of telling.
2 minutes of time. But that's going to go by real quickly if you're going around scrambling to try to get those particles back after each time you shoot
Yeah.
it.
But I mean, we were kind of thinking if you make a loop, say you're shooting one particle every, 5 to 10 seconds, you could score, you could probably shoot particles through there if you get it consistently going 15 times, right? So that's a lot of points. That's 75 points, that's significantly more than the cat ball. That's assuming 15 shots. Significantly more than the cat ball and a bit more than pushing both beacons in autonomous.
Which
Now,
hopefully you got before.
They have.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of clear that they have taken measures against that this year, because underneath the baskets there are those little cone guards that are meant to have the
Yeah, to
balls
spread
fly out,
out
to
the-
spread them out, to make it even harder to score points on them. And
Yeah.
one thing that does make me wonder is if they are maybe trying to make particles the swing points, like they're trying to make it so no,
Maybe.
you can't make real points with the particles this year. But if you can get around that
Yeah.
and get a loop going, you're going to be able to make a lot of points.
Yeah, and I think that if you can hit the beacons and get a loop going, you're going to be pretty much unbeatable this year.
Well, those two combined, considering you also get more particles for each beacon you hit.
Yeah, and that's something we haven't really talked about yet, but that could be really important. you start out with 3 particles and you can get at most 5 during the game, that's a huge difference just for pushing those buttons during autonomous, and it makes the beacons even more valuable than just their point value.
That's almost 50% increase in the number of particles you have.
Definitely.
Well, it's from 3 to 5. That's actually
it's more than a 50%.
It's more than a 50% increase.
It's almost a 100% increase.
It's like a 66.
Yeah, 66.6.
That's
never ending.
Let's not get into those 66 numbers. It gets dangerous there. But yeah.
Okay. So we've kind of touched on a lot of the things that we think are important in this year's game. So are there any other kind of little rules that you think might have been overlooked or things we haven't talked about yet?
Well, I mentioned that we were hoping to get clarifications of rules on the first forums. Mm-hmm. And one thing, so there's the rule that the particles have to hit the ground before they can be rescored.
Yeah.
And that's for both the sides, corner goals, and the baskets. And one thing to consider about that is that's another kind of way of trying to stop loops from happening.
They're called corner vortexes.
The corner vortexes. And that rule, and we're trying to get that clarified about whether or not you're allowed to touch the balls before they hit the ground in order for them to count as scoring. So say if you have the baskets, if you could put a giant funnel that maybe expands out underneath the baskets so that when you shoot, the particles fall into the funnel and then funnel down to your robot. Are you allowed to do that? And as long as they hit the ground before your robot scores them again, is it good? Or do the particles have to free fall from the basket all the way to the ground before you're even allowed to touch them?
Yeah, that could change some team strategies depending on what you're planning on doing. I guess one thing that I think that we haven't touched on yet is those pictures underneath the beacon. So that's pretty obviously angled towards kind of vision programming with those phones and trying to use the phone cameras to see pictures and navigate by that. So that'll be a really interesting programming challenge, and I think the people who can do that well probably have a pretty good chance of winning the control award.
And then one thing for me is those pictures seem almost majority for the control award because there's still a line in front of the beacons that you can follow to press the buttons, which is what people did last year.
It's traditional.
So I'm having trouble seeing how the pictures really help. How reading the pictures would really help you score better in autonomous. Because it's a cool thing to be able to do. You could identify which beacon you're at. But in an autonomous program, if you just start from a set position, you know where the beacons are going to be, and the programmers will know if they've hit the right beacon during their program. And then in teleop, you can just see the color of the beacon so you know whether or not you need to hit it. So I'm just unclear on what the true purpose, other than getting the control award.
It's very possible that they're just opening up options for programmers to use. And it could just be something that they want you to get familiar with for games to come.
Maybe, yeah, that's a good point. I will say, as a programmer, you might be underestimating a little bit the difficulty of just getting to that line in the first place without other lines on the field. A little bit. It's possible to do it with gyro sensors and so on, but especially for a lot of rookie teams, that might be kind of a hard thing to do. But then again, I guess
but
the
for
rookie
teams
aren't
going to be super able to do this because the visual imaging and sensing itself is pretty advanced.
Yeah, that requires quite a bit.
I kind of figured that if you have the ability or the willingness to learn to be able to do that, you're probably just as well off just learning to do a gyro so you can drive straight at one of the lines, and then once you're on the line, you know where you are and you can get that going. But it'll be interesting to see how teams use that.
Not only that, but because the picture is the picture itself and not an actual color, for more experienced coders, for autonomous, they can use the picture instead of the actual color sensor itself, which I think would be more reliable, because if you remember last year, we were having trouble with our color sensor due to different forms of light. It would disrupt the sensor.
Yeah, but so I think one of the main points of having the pictures there is that it's different from the rest of the wall, right? Most of the wall is going to be transparent, so I guess it's possible in some surroundings that the rest of the wall might be kind of black or have some other kind of color. But those pictures are going to be in contrast with that, so that's what makes it easy to see from a programming standpoint.
Right. But those are ideas on this year's game.
Yeah. One other, so I guess we kind of realized that nothing has been said about the pressure of the cat balls, and I don't want to be kind of nitpicky. Honestly, I don't think it's a big deal either way. Just blow them up to a decent pressure. But I know that there will be teams who think that is important and will want clarification on that.
So that would be something else to look for on the forums, especially if if you're planning on hosting a game, knowing if there is a required PSI would be important.
Definitely. I can definitely see people challenging that if they think that the ball is over or underinflated.
Yeah.
Be like Deflategate all over again.
Oh boy.
Okay, so I guess let's end this.
Let's end this
with one more question for everybody. What do you think What do you think that the winning robots at the World Championship this year will be able to do?
I believe that the robots that will win this year will be able to consistently protect their beacons and press the beacons, for that matter, shoot into the moving center vortex, and be able to seamlessly pick up the cat ball and stick it on the actual cap for a clean, easy 40 points in endgame.
Got it.
I believe that a winning robot in World Championships will look a little something like this. They will be able to, in autonomous, get both of the beacons, of course, to get those extra particles. During teleop, they'll be able to shoot consistently those particles into the high goal, whilst their partner is hopefully grabbing those beacons for in-game. And then during in-game, for them to be able to get that cap ball all the way up and place it on top of the stand. I think that is what a winning robot will look like.
Rand.
I believe the world's competition, a winning robot will be able to do everything in autonomous, including the 15 points for scoring a particle in the goal during autonomous, which we didn't really talk about because that's going to be so hard. But they will be able to do that and both beacons, and then they will be able to go for either the lower goal or the high goal, so that they can accommodate their team member whether or not they go for either the side vortex or the baskets, and then they will be able to take the cap ball and put it on top of the baskets without having to depend on the center baskets not spinning. They will be able to put it on the baskets whether or not the opponent team is trying to spin the baskets around. That is what I think a robot at the World's competition will look like.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not convinced that teams will be able to both. So I would say that a winning team of the World Championship is going to be really good at pushing beacon buttons and have a reliable autonomous, probably be able to score one of the particles during autonomous. I don't think that there will be many or possibly no teams that will be able to both set up a loop like we were talking about and score the cap ball. I think it's going to be one or the other, not both. And I think either one of those approaches could potentially be really rewarding. So thanks for listening.